Hello, friends. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. Hello, Kevin. Hello, Leona. Oh, and there's Dick. Hello, Dick. And Barbara Vale. Hello. And Kelsey's back. Woohoo. Jan. Hello, Jan. And Jan, the package was received already. Yeah, so good. Loretta. Hello. Eve. Catherine, of course. Nice to see you. Ms. Joni. Barbara Boucher is coming on. Karen, Vonnie, Kim Taylor, and Teresa Gomez. Yeah. Oh, there's Vonnie. Yes, we know you. Well, welcome. I'm so happy to see this particular group of people today. I know that sounds like maybe something I would always say, but this really is like a real great group of friends to me anyway. So before we get right into things, I wonder if we could start off, because I always, stall a little bit to let people in the room, but it's already a few minutes in. I wonder if anyone wants to just kick right off by sharing why you came today, if it was different than some other day. So if the answer is, well, I come to this every week, sorry, we don't want to hear from you. But if you have a special interest in today, if you actually know what today's topic is, I would love to hear a few of you share what your interests are. And then what we'll do is we will, I don't know, we'll probably take a moment, take a little breath, and then we'll get into some teaching stuff and then some doing stuff and then some Q&A. So that's probably the format. So anybody find that there was a particular reason for being here? Unmute yourself and just jump right in. And hello, Chris. Welcome back.
Hey,
So,
Dr. Jonathan.
hey, Kelsey, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. I got your reply, by the way, and I'm gonna take it.
Good.
Okay.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah, well, I was just really pumped about this class and everything because I've been really interested. I've been doing a lot of ancestor veneration work over the last like year, I would say, maybe even a little bit longer, and just kind of learning as much as I can about ceremony, working with like the spirit realm and in particular ancestors. So I'm kind of like starting a business with creating items for altars and for ritual practice, just for really like any sort of religion or, whatever it is that you want to do. But yeah, creating this business and it's been really fun, but it's just like diving into this whole new realm for me in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
you got me thinking already. I'm gonna make some notes um, about tools, and I
Oh yeah.
love that you're talking about how to cross cultures. So that's great.
Yeah, my goal is to kind of make things that aren't so religion specific because when I started to set up my altar, what I realized is that, you're like either Wiccan or you're Christian or you're Hindu. They're very like boxed things and then everything's the same and I just kind of got sick of it. So,
Very good. All right.
yeah.
Thank you. That's a great way to start. Somebody else, does anybody have a special motive for being here today? Joni, I can't imagine. Come on in. Oh,
Okay. I am so excited to introduce one of my animal spirit helpers who accompanies me on my shamanic journeys. And she is returning to my altar today after having um, had an accident in flight and broke a tip of her wing off, and she's now repaired and she's back home and on my altar. And I have I brought my computer into my energy room to celebrate this with all of you. And
oh,
I am, yeah, I'm really pleased that this is occurring today.
Very good. And so nice to meet your helper friend there. That's great. And I think it's a good example that will help our conversation later. So thank you. I think I saw one other person leaning in. Dick, is that you?
Well, I could, but I'm particularly interested in how to have kind of a ritual or a meditation, or not a meditation, but I guess a ritual with myself, by myself. You know, like you mentioned before, one of the things that are primary, and it seems a little bit strange because I've always done it with other people. So it's going to be. I'd like to hear your comments on that, where that's going to go.
Very good. Okay, I'm making a note about
I'll jump in, Dick, to say I'm interested to hear that too. Thanks for sharing that. This is Chris, by the way.
Yeah, Chris, of course. Anyone else? Any other special? Yes.
I'm interested.
Oh, go ahead, Eve.
I'm interested in the same thing.
Same thing. Okay. Well, then circle that. And is it Teresa?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
So the two words that drew me were ceremony and spirit, and a combination of that, because for me, ceremony, ritual reaches us, touches us in a very deep way.
Mm.
And so I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Very good. Okay. And you've got me thinking about something I'm going to make a note about. So thank you. Anybody else?
Sure, I'll jump back in if it's all right. A couple quick thoughts. One, what drew me today is that I've been gone several weeks out on the road, so it's nice to be back. And I'll share more about this later. It's kind of an interlaced topic, but I was going to tell you, Jonathan, and everybody, about a documentary I watched on the plane a couple days ago called "The Lakota Nation versus the U.S. Government." Have you heard of it?
Oh, I've heard of it, but I don't know what it's about.
Yeah, I watched the first hour. It's really about the land of the Black Hills.
Oh, yeah.
There's what else I'll tease with and say for later is I had never heard of, and I think most people have not heard of, the Dakota 38. And more about that later. I'll leave it there for now. But it's an excellent documentary I recommend to everybody. And it definitely ties into this this topic. Thanks.
Where did you watch it on, Chris?
I was on the airplane on American Airlines.
What? Oh, it was just like an option on the airplane?
It was an option, yeah, in the
Oh, wow.
documentary. And it's about 2 hours long. I only got to watch about an hour, but
Okay.
it was mostly interviews with Indians, with the native Lakota and various branches of Lakota. And yeah, I'll go ahead and tell you guys the punchline of the Dakota 38. So they were in the same week that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He also signed the order for the largest mass execution, 38 Lakota. So different spin on Lincoln as well.
Yeah, I think I know. Well,
You probably know the story, at least.
There was a similar story, and I think they were Dakota and
yeah, Dakota. This was Dakota, 38 Dakota.
Yeah. It was like a public massacre.
Right, public hanging, correct.
Yeah. Yes.
And maybe it's the Dakota Nation versus U.S. government. In any event, search it and you can find it. I've looked it up, and I'll finish watching it this time. So thanks for the time, and back to you, sir.
Okay. Very good.
I just want to say hello.
Hello.
This is Leona.
Yeah, it's good to say
Hi.
hello.
I just want to say hello because this is my first time participating in these Thursday sessions. I'm so excited about it. I took Jonathan's wonderful 4-week class on the soul purpose. And in that, we talked about ceremonies. And I want to build on what I learned in that wonderful class. So I'm glad that this is today's topic.
Great. And actually, Leona, Jan, and Joni, there's a video still coming that comes with that class. That comes with that class. So stay tuned. All right. Well, this is kind of a nice warm up. I appreciate hearing some voices and getting some energy in the room. Anybody else before we just take a pause, take a breath, and move into some, I guess we would call it content. It seems. All right, in that case, let's just take a quiet moment. This is not a significant, well, it's significant, not a substantial step, but just a simple step to kind of shift gears a little bit. So I'm going to invite you, if you would like, to close your eyes and draw in a nice deep kind of cleansing breath, exhale, and just sort of release the busyness of your mind or your day. You can sigh if you like. Helps to make a noise, helps to let your jaw drop. And I invite you just to notice, be in a moment of growing awareness. Feeling of your body, your kind of emotional state, the sounds in the room or outside. Just allow your awareness to expand for a moment. That's all. Just quiet, sensing, noticing, expanding. And in that expansion, with your eyes closed, your heart and mind open, just creating an awareness that we are in this space together. Despite any differences of time or location, there is a kind of higher space that we are slowly moving into just through our attention, just through our intention. And then when you're ready, a few more deep breaths. And coming back. Okay. So the topic this week follows last week's topic. So last week we talked quite a bit about why celebrations and ceremonies of the spirit world, which is sort of like a tongue twister or an alliteration anyway, why celebrations of the spirit world recur in cultures all over the world. And while we have absolutely seen a pretty dramatic division occur between Western-based and indigenous-based traditions, or I could even say earth-based traditions, in which the modern Western world has, and I'm generalizing, we've seen religious traditions move authority over ceremony and ritual to centralized hierarchies. So if you want to be married in most of the Christian traditions, you don't get to do that at home. You don't do that for yourself. Same would be true of the Jewish tradition in general, the Islamic tradition as well. And that doesn't mean that these traditions are devoid of ceremony and ritual. They're filled with them, of course. And it actually doesn't mean that these traditions are devoid of connection to the spirit world. They're actually filled with it, which is kind of ironic because they all claim to be monotheistic, which in terms of an understanding of what God is, that's approximately true. But what we find throughout the Judeo-Christian world, despite any what you might call original intentions to suppress direct connections to the spirit world or the acknowledgement of a spirit world, we find equivalents show up anyway. Saints, for example, angels, for example, memorials of loved ones and the lighting of candles for people that have passed. And these prevalent practices and teachings that either directly or indirectly imply that there is a spiritual world somewhere located between us and the one all powerful being that we call God, or that they call God. The difference, though, with what I would call earth-based traditions and Eastern traditions are kind of in a funny position where they kind of represent a bit of a stretch between these two worlds, because of course, if you look at ancient Eastern traditions like Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, there is a lot of ancestor veneration. I think that was a word that Kelsey used. That's actually a great word. Not necessarily worship. I mean, that's kind of a weird Western word. But ancestor honoring, ancestor reference, ancestor relationship, there's tons of that. And in Hinduism, for example, there's not only lots of that, but then there's a super, super rich and complex pantheon of deities and divinities. And yet, the Eastern traditions have progressively become more hierarchical in their expressions and structures, and do reflect sort of a Western template. Hinduism is an interesting tradition that sort of, again, spans the spectrum of traditions, because you find, in my opinion, everything there, including very rigid hierarchies, as well as very generous pluralism, as well as lots happening at home, as well as lots happening in the community. So that's kind of an interesting example we're not going to get into.
Sorry, Jonathan, what was that one again?
Hinduism.
Hinduism. Okay, thank you.
So we have the East. So we have the Western on the one extreme that as a general rule says, hey, don't be talking about the spirit world. It's all about you and God. And if you're going to do ceremony, you come to us. And then you have the Eastern traditions. And I'm suggesting they represent a bit of a blending, because you do hear that same kind of message, and yet there is an innate retention of ancestor awareness and spirit beings of other dimensions. And then we move to the more indigenous or earth-based traditions, and you find a much more explicit integration of that interim realm between the human and the ultimate divine, in which the spirit world, which would include, as Joni indicated, spirit guides, as Kelsey indicated, relationship to ancestors, it would include all that in a much more regular, or even what you could call kind of a daily basis. And there is an implication or an instruction that pervades indigenous and earth-based traditions that ceremonies are a way of life, which means they're not just for certain people, they're not just for certain times, and they're not just for certain places. They're for everyone always. And I do believe that myself. I do believe, moving on now a little bit, that ceremony is to spirituality what exercise, nutrition, and sleep are to the body, right? It's one of the fundamental vehicles of spiritual maturity, connection, growth. And a number of you acknowledge that. Eve, Dick, others who said this daily practice feels important. Chris as well. And that's that natural sense, like, well, if I want exercise, or if I want a physical body that's well, I'm going to watch what I eat and get out for some exercise every day. If I want a mind that's well, I'm going to cultivate mindfulness and skillful use of thoughts and attention. If I want a healthy emotional life, I'm going to pay attention to my feelings and learn how to experience them and self-regulate and so on. But in the spiritual world, I think because of the Western influence in so many of our lives, for so many people, it's become something predominantly mental. It's thinking, it's praying, its philosophy, its belief. And all those things are important. However, I do believe that ceremony is a container that helps us interact with those beliefs, those prayers, those values and intentions in a more holistic way. And when I say holistic, I mean ceremony by definition integrates mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. It is behavioral by definition. It is in this world by definition, and somewhat ironically, no, maybe paradoxically, it is a way of bringing what we might consider two worlds together. In other words, when we take that ritual moment in our morning or our evening or upon a special occasion, we are explicitly inviting the spiritual dimension, the spiritual energy, and spiritual meaning to be more potent in that experience than, let's say, whatever precedes or follows it. So from there, I would love to just kind of get into the kind of nuts and bolts and talk about at least what I've learned. How do we create it? And what are the steps and why? I think when you hear it, it's not going to sound like rocket science. It's not going to sound like some esoteric secret that I'm revealing. You're going to be like, oh, sure, right. That makes total sense. That's kind of how you do lots of things. The problem is we just don't often sit together and think about these things or talk about these things. I have to kind of make a little bit of a joke because in some ways, you know, every discipline, whether it's spirituality or medicine or gardening, you know, we have a way of, well, there's a double-edged sword because there's a way that we cherish whatever our unique path is. And the upside is that we make what we do really special. And the downside is that that can be a source of separation or ego or self-importance. And I remember the first time I took a business management class in university, I was just sort of stunned by the textbook because I'll never forget the first sort of business model that they provided. You know, I don't remember what it exactly was, but I remember when I left the class what I said. And I said, I can't believe that this is actually a chapter in a book, because basically what they said was, when you want to walk through a door, you first identify the door you want to walk through. Then you approach the door. Then you open the door. Then you walk through the door. And then you're on the other side of the door. And I thought, this is absurd. And yet, if that doesn't come naturally to you, or if you've never done it before, then having the ability to walk through the steps with someone is helpful. And then you find out, okay, so some people have only pushed a door open. They've never pulled a door open. Some people are scared of big doors. Some people only like sliding doors. You know, you realize the world is more complicated. That's my way of saying, this isn't a perfect system. This is just some ideas and steps to help you, but you're certainly welcome to complement it with your own research and your own tradition and whatever makes sense for you. Are there any questions or comments before we take another step? Because I'm going to put a slide up in a moment. Are we good? Okay. So at the heart of any ritual or ceremony, I believe, is the engagement of energy and meaning. The engagement of energy and meaning. And I'm going to put this in a slide for you. 1 sec. So the engagement of hang on. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you. So engaging energy and meaning simply means that in every step of what you do, you want to be self-aware or intentionally aware of the fact that everything is both symbolic in a psychological way and or significant in an energetic way. Now, this is very important to me because it is my experience that when in doubt, always choose energy over meaning. That's just my belief. Why do I say that? Because if we are talking about engaging the spiritual world or the spiritual realm, whether that's spirits, angels, ancestors, or the presence of God itself, then I would say that all of these things are more, if you could put it that way, they are more energy than they are meaning. Meaning is the human interface with the energy. As we experience the energy of a spirit or a divine place or occasion, we feel the meaning, which is a kind of blending of what I believe is the implicit meaning or the innate meaning, but also our own history, our own culture, our own personality. So two people can be in the very same moment of the very same ceremony and interpret that moment differently. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all up for interpretation. I don't believe that. I do believe that energy is absolutely real. I do believe that the world of mind, of meaning, even imagination, are essential in engaging or to engage the energy of the spiritual world. But when in doubt, it's just important that we don't get too into our heads about ceremony. So to me, the mind and meaning and symbol and myth, all these things, which includes cultural iconography, cultural symbolism, all these things are important. You want them to engage your psychology as you pick your ritual items. Kelsey was talking about that. As you set your time and place and so on, meaning is absolutely essential, but rarely more important than energy. And what would that look like? It would look like, well, I can give you all, I got all kinds of examples already. So it might look like this. So I might, there's this necklace and well, maybe this isn't a good example. So this isn't symbolic. It's not important because it's symbolic. Yeah, I think I picked a bad example. This is no, let me do this one. Okay, so I have this bracelet here. And this is a bracelet. It's made by a Lakota artist. And I love this bracelet. I wear this bracelet a lot. If I put this on my altar, I would say it would be mostly symbolic. Mostly like in the world of psychology and meaning. Oh, this signifies my connection to Indigenous people. This signifies, you know, an event that I went to and I picked this up. But if I'm perfectly honest, this particular piece of jewelry doesn't have a lot of energy from me, in the sense that if it was lost or stolen or broken, I'd be bummed out, but not that much. On the other hand, let's see. I have this stone that I've carried from the village of one of my African mentors, that I've had for 20 years now. It's a very special stone to me, and it's not just meaningful because of the time, but from this first moment I picked it up, there's a feeling, and it when I hold it, I connect with the energy of his home property. This has been under my pillow for dreaming. So it's an example of meaning and energy. And if I lost this, it's remarkable I haven't lost it in 20 years. I'd feel horrible. I would feel horrible. And often when I share that with people or show it to people, it's the kind of thing where people can, ooh, I feel it. Now, as we get into the steps, this energy and meaning dichotomy will make more sense, but I just really wanted to take some time to dwell on it because I think it's significant that we don't overthink things. We feel it, and that's what energy is all about. Okay, let's move on. And by the way, if you are confused or disagree or want to clarify something I say, just to unmute yourself and speak up. Because while I have the slides up, I can't actually see everybody. I only see some of you. So just don't worry about interrupting. Just interrupt. Okay, the next thing. Whether this is a ceremony you want to create, for example, to honor a loved one that's passed on, or to call for help in a situation in your life, or maybe it's just a daily ritual and routine, intention, time, and place actually matter. If you are not choosing your time and place in advance, then frankly, it's not very intentional. Now, are there rituals that can be without intentional time and place? Sure, you might carry a bag of offering, like rice, or in Native communities, it might be tobacco. And then when something happens, you see a poor animal that's been hit by a car and died on the side of the road. Well, you might have a little ceremony or ritual of taking out that offering, rolling down the window, putting it outside. That's an example of something that's a spontaneous ritual practice. It's not the same as a ceremony that says, on Thursday night, we will gather at sundown and as an example, when I've been involved with traditional sweat lodges, for example, ceremonial steam baths, there has always been a lot of attention and intention around where it's going to be done, because we want these places to be energetically clean. We want them to be safe and free from distraction. We don't want them to be interrupted, right? There's a real intentionality to the place you pick. You want it to foster your purpose, and you really want it to insulate and protect you from any distraction or opposing energy at all. More than that, once we have agreed on the time for a ceremony, and it's interesting because I actually was at a sweat lodge just a few days ago, and a fellow was doing a kind of an honoring for his mom who passed away in the summer. And he called a number of important people in his life, including some family members, to join him. And it was kind of weird, but everybody ended up not being able to make it, except just a few people, including me. Now, the point is, in a more Western, symbolic, meaning-driven approach, more mental-driven approach to ceremony, probably people would say, we invited 10 people and only 3 can come. Let's reschedule for when everybody can come, right? It's kind of a very normal Western way of thinking. But in a spirit world consciousness, in a ceremony that's for another dimension, that ain't how it goes down. If you've been essentially telling your ancestors, your spirit guides, your angels, your whatever you're conceiving and relating to, if you've been telling them for days that you're going to meet them on Thursday at 9, you better be there Thursday at 9. And if you're going to keep canceling and moving it around, well, you may not be surprised to find that they're not that interested in showing up when you invite them. Now, this may not be the way you think of things, but in communities and traditions where the spirit world is very real, you treat it like it's real. And if you're not quite there yet, but you'd like to get there, then you've got to follow through. And that means that the spirit world participants are equally as real and important as human this world participants. This is, to me, a big piece. So even if you say, let's say even if it's in your church community, or even if it's in just your neighborhood, and you say, I would like to suggest that we do a ceremony for peace, you know, for what's going on in the world, for what's going on in the Middle East, for what's going on in Eastern Europe. I want to do a ceremony for peace, and let's call on, you know, the ancestors of all these places to help bring peace into the hearts of those that are waging war. Okay, so we cross over from just a symbolic event to let's call for the help of the spirit world, or let's call the guidance of angels. You see how it becomes now more interactive instead of just me doing something symbolic alone. And we call and we set that intention. We put it out there verbally. We mark it on the calendar. Maybe we even send emails about it. And then all of a sudden someone says, you know what? None of us can come because we already committed to cleaning the kitchen at the church that night. In this style of ceremonial thinking, that's fine. They can all go clean the kitchen. You don't cancel. You follow through, because the commitment and the affirmation is that the spirit world is just as much a part of the ceremony if one person is there as if 100 people are there. So we're going to get into the simple steps, but I'm going to pause because it's actually a lot of content already. Does anybody want to interject or ask something or challenge something? You can just say, this doesn't match my tradition, or this sounds weird, or I mean, imagine even, you know, a service in a mosque or a synagogue or a church, and there's a snowstorm and like only 5 people are there, right? I mean, that's happened. I've been there. What do you all see? Let's not bother. Let's just go get donuts. No, don't get donuts. You've been planning something. Do it. Now, maybe you're going to do it shorter. Maybe you're going to do it a little different. Okay, that's understandable. But if our purpose today is talking about ceremonies of connection to the spirit world, then the spirit world is the centerpiece of that relationship, not just mental beliefs or values. Okay, so let's continue then. So the simple steps.
Well, Jonathan, I'll jump into say a couple quick things. I do identify with what you're saying about that, regardless of the number of people, whether it's 2 people or 100 people, it's somewhat similar to the idea of when you're connected to meditation, when we're, as you open the prayer today, right? We're in the same time and space, regardless of where we are physically and so forth.
Exactly. So, yeah. Absolutely. Good example.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to our, simple steps. So the first phase of any ceremony is actually before the ceremony. Now, that's why I feel like in the Western, well, it's funny. I just had kind of an aha moment. In the Western world, I think sometimes we show up to ceremonies by other cultures or traditions, and sometimes, you know, especially when we're asked to make a donation, you know, we put in $5 or $2 or whatever, you know, because we were only there for an hour, and we do the math. Well, there's 20 people. I know they're going to do all right if 20 people give $5 or something like that. That's kind of the way we think. But we forget that in any true spiritual ceremony of any culture or tradition, the ones responsible for the ceremony really generally begin that ceremony long before you're there. And that includes their training, that includes their lifestyle, that includes their personal preparation, and then in a more immediate or local way, that includes the way they prepare themselves for the event, preparing the space or the altar if we're talking about something you do at home, and even how we prepare others. Now, let's just talk about a local event. So you're planning a memorial, you're planning a celebration of a change, you're expressing gratitude. So before you conduct your ceremony, even if it's just you at home, or if it's a small group of friends or family, preparing yourself, and I've got to tell you, this is just my opinion, but I've learned this over the years, and it's so important. What that means is from the minute, whatever that moment is you conceive of as the beginning, you are already in the mode and the consciousness and the energy. So it's not like one of these things where, and yeah, and so I was going to give an example of like Althea, where I used to do these ceremonies, and it would feel like, you know, people would be talking to me right to the second before I started something, and I'd be on my phone. I would always take time before that to make sure that the minute I arrived at the building, I was basically, for me internally, I was already connected to that zone I wanted to be in, because I knew that there would be stuff coming up all the way until the actual first step of the ceremony. So the point is, if you're going to invite people to something, and let's say it's Sunday at 3 p.m. in your living room, you want to be in the consciousness by 2 p.m. That means by 2:30, your phone is off, your mind is quiet, your heart is open. There's this idea that you are a part of the container that is both welcoming others and the other world. And that's the same of your space. You want your space cared for and prepared. You want it clean. You want it beautiful. And if you need to purify, and that might be through incense, which we find in every culture of the world, from frankincense to sage to Buddhist incense or whatever may be burning here. I'm just preparing my own space right now. You want to have the space prepared, and you also want to front load the expectations, belief, and behavior of others. And in the West, that's a little bit hard these days, especially in the spiritual but not religious world, because we don't want to tell people how to be spiritual, and we don't want to tell people how to behave. But you know what? If it's a ceremony of real energy and power, you do want to tell people, hey, come here with an open mind, come here with an open heart, be yourself. But it's also really important that we are all aligned in certain values within this ceremony. So once it begins, and then whatever you need, no one interrupts, or nobody opens the door, or nobody answers their phone, or the opposite. You know, whatever it is, it's just about being intentional. So then we go to kind of what we're setting people up for. When we're preparing others and ourselves, it's really about working with our attitude, our attention, and our mindset or heart set. And something that I think is a little bit related to what Chris pointed out, it's like, or at least you mentioned the word meditation, it's like you want to be in a meditative, receptive space. And interestingly, we have intention and attention and, you know, all these things, but attitude and intention and mindset. But what you pay attention to is critical. And what I mean by that is, if you have drama or distraction in your life, I would argue you've got to create a buffer. Now, if this is a daily ritual, well, that's fine. That might be you sit down at your altar, you ring a bell, you smudge, and you do some breathing to get quiet. And then if you have some ceremonial activity, which we're now going to go through what that might be, then you get into your activity. But ideally, you want to transition before and after. Interestingly, in a lot of Eastern and indigenous traditions, even though we don't get to see them see this from the outside, it is extremely common to teach pre and post ceremony rituals and behaviors. Now, we don't always get to hear about that because we just see whatever it is, the puja ceremony, or we just see the bar mitzvah, or we just see the Sundance, whatever. For the ritual leaders, there is almost always a ritualized phase leading up to and following. So in the microcosm at home, it would be the same. So the beginning is always an opening and a purification, which means you don't jump right into, okay, I lit my candle, I burnt my thing, here's what I want, right? That's not it. We start off with an opening according to our, if this is a personal ritual, that can be according to your tradition. It could be reading the Lord's Prayer. It could be whatever. I'm not saying what that would be for you, but there is an intentional departure from the ordinary world and signifying the opening transition. And again, that could be lighting a bell, ringing a bell, lighting a candle, sitting in a certain place or position, taking a certain body posture, and usually purification through sound, through behavior, through smoke, through incense, through water. Think about the holy water at the back of a church. That's a part of it. But then implicit in that is our calling. So we move from whatever sound, behavior, or sensory experience creates the opening and the purification to the calling of that which we want in the ceremony with us. So that could be God and the spirit world, that could be God and the angels, that could be only God. But in the context of what we said we would talk about today, that would be specifically those that guide you. That would be specifically guardians, guides. Now, I will say that when I do my calling, it's pretty comprehensive. It's usually dear God, angels, ancestors, guides and guardians, grandmothers, grandfathers. That's mine. It's pretty much what I say every time because I want everyone in. And I don't really know who's available, but I'm calling them all. But the point is, you'll notice there's a kind of spectrum that comes right down to grandmothers and grandfathers, which for me is the literal ancestors, like my dad, my mom's parents, my dad's dad, mentors that have passed away or passed over. Like that's that dimension. Having said that, it is almost always recommended that you don't do just a blanket invitation either, which is, I welcome the spirit world into my circle. So for most ceremonialists, that's a huge no-no because you don't know what's in the spirit world. You don't even have a clue what you're inviting. That's like saying, my son is allowed to throw a party and everyone at his high school is invited. That will never happen. I've seen some of those kids. So you want to be specific about who you're inviting. And sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you might even be specific about who you're not inviting. So some of the ritual incenses that are used in different traditions, though we aren't always told what they are, sometimes they're very specifically to keep unwanted or harmful energy out. And again, whether you think of that as symbolic or literal, that's almost always included. And Joni mentioned a week ago, I think, I usually say in something a little more intense, either out loud or a little more internally, I will be clear, only those that are here to help and guide, only those that are of the light or for the highest good are welcome. So that's a little bit about calling. And then usually there is some kind of demonstration of what we are offering them, like as if we have invited a special guest, right? You've invited a Nobel Prize winner. You've invited a queen. You've invited a celebrated physician. And it's like, we've brought you this blanket, or we've got this commemorative watch, when you invite someone special to something special, usually there's a way of honoring their time and their presence. This is not just about this is not just a transactional, thanks for coming, here's a candle. This is an intentional exchange of energy. In the work of Patrice Malidoma Somé, and that's someone you might want to look up, the last name is S-O-M-E. Malidoma Somé is how you can look him up at the bookstore or Amazon. He has one called, I think it's called Power, Ritual, and Community, which is a really great book on these things. And he talks a bit about, I think he talks about, or maybe it's a different book by him, but he talks about ceremony. And he talks about sacrifice, how offering typically includes some kind of a sacrifice. And sacrifice just means that I give something of importance. Now, again, in the indigenous world, that may have been, tobacco that's kept in a pouch. If you don't have a way to get ceremonial tobacco, sometimes you just got to buy a cigarette and break the filter off, and there's your offering. Maybe in your tradition, frankincense and myrrh, I actually acquired those years ago. If you want to be more traditional to a Jewish tradition or a Christian tradition, I mean, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, those were supposedly the biggest gifts that came in one of the most important moments. So why wouldn't you offer frankincense and myrrh? The point is that you want to give an energy for the energy you're asking for. And probably the most universal offering is food. So you could pour a little water, a little wine. If you're going to have a meal later that day or breakfast afterwards, right? You could put a little coffee on that altar. You could put a little bit of your future cinnamon bun or grapes, right? The idea is what you're going to feed your body and your life with, you will first offer in your ceremony or in your ritual. And of course, if it's a bigger ceremony or ritual, it's a bigger offering. There's a lot of stuff here, but I'm going to keep going, and we're gonna try to wrap all this up pretty soon. If you're preparing food for a bigger ceremony, like the remembrance of someone, or asking for help for a big healing in your life, then you want to prepare that food with intention, with all the same energy, meaning, all the stuff we've talked about so far. And typically you will try not to eat or sample that food until after it's offered, which is a very important kind of energetic and symbolic gesture that says, this is not recreational food. This is what we would call spirit food. And then we move into the intention of the ceremony. And that could be, my daily ritual. And after I've lit my candle, done my smudge, the opening and purification, made my prayer, called for help, sprinkled my tobacco. I actually, oops, sorry, my cards just did that. I have this. This is from Africa. This is my little tobacco offering. I put what I make an offering with each hand for my mother's ancestors, my father's ancestors. So we've gone through those. Then I get into my intention. Now, maybe I'm asking for guidance, and every day I just would like a little help getting through my day. And I'm using something like oracle cards. So I pick my card. Shared inspiration. That was kind of just a random choice, although that feels quite appropriate for what we're doing right now. The importance of sharing these traditions. So to me, that's just like a happy, thanks for doing this. But again, maybe this is your time to do, read your eulogy or express your desire for help or express your gratitude. So this is your moment to do whatever it is you personally wanted to do in the ceremony. This is the most kind of situational and custom moment. And then we move on to gratitude. No matter what this is for or about, we thank those that have come. We thank the energy that's present. We thank the spiritual energy that's present. And if we've asked for something, we give thanks as though that prayer were already being answered, which is, I think, very significant. And then finally, before closing, we are very conscientious about releasing whatever and whoever we have called into the ceremony. And that's not just thank you everyone for being here today, may you leave with blessings and love and healing, but that is quite literally to those that have come, however that would be in your language or tradition, from the world beyond. We give thanks and return you to where you come from, or return you to the mystery, or release you from this circle, whatever language feels comfortable. But for those that are in the consciousness that the spirit world is real, then we don't just call them as if it's real at the beginning because we want something and then we've asked for it, and then we just leave the room as if now it's not real. That would be like calling an important, physician or healer or psychologist to your house, and they come a long way, and then they come in and you tell them what you need, and you just leave them sitting there at the kitchen table and you walk out. You'd never do that. You'd thank them for coming, you'd make your offering, and you'd walk them to the door when the time comes. So we release who or whatever we've called. And then there's the actual closing, which is, again, whatever is comfortable for your tradition, your personal preference, your spiritual style. And that could be a closing prayer. That could be a closing song. That could be a closing gesture or behavior. And this pattern can happen in 5 minutes, and it can happen over 5 days. But the point is, if we are creating a true energized ceremony of spiritual connection or spirit connection, then at least personally, I've never heard of anything that would run without these things. Now, of course, different practices, teachers, and traditions will add to this, or will have some very elaborate versions of some of these elements. But I can't say I've seen anything without it that makes sense to me. And that, my dear friends, brings us to the end of our slide and the end of our time. Now, I'm not going to leave immediately. Let's talk a little bit about this. Obviously, I just can see that by the time and the amount of content we just went through, we will not be doing this actively together, which is sort of sad, but maybe next week. But to you.
Well, Jonathan, I'll jump in to say I put a couple things in the chat bar and it'd be easier to just tell you, but the things you're saying at the end about thanking them, and I put a note in there about utilizing them. It's something I've heard from other meditation leaders as well. You don't call Gandhi and then don't utilize Gandhi because he doesn't come back next time.
Right.
If you didn't need me, I didn't need to be called. So
right.
Yeah, I just add that.
Yes, that's great. And you know what that also gets me? Sorry, I wasn't reading the chat because I was talking, but yeah.
There's a lot in there. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I hope others can see it. But Chris, what you also remind me is that there's a pretty pervasive belief in the world that those in the spirit world or of the spirit world, that they want to help and they are there to help. But kind of like what you said, Chris, but we have to do part of the work. We have to prepare the space. We have to set the intention, and we have to make the invitation, right? So even if the analogy were Gandhi or a psychologist or a physician or whatever, a physiotherapist, I mean, they're not walking the streets of your town just checking with everyone. Do you need something? Do you need something? Do you need something? Like that doesn't often happen. So asking for help explicitly matters, as well as saying thank you and releasing. Other comments or questions? We can definitely take 5 more minutes. Yeah, Dick.
Jonathan, what kind of comes to mind is short and sweet, meaning my lady and I before meals, for example, or we'll do a little appreciation for the meal, a little thankfulness for the abundance that we have, thankfulness for energies that come and go in the relationship that we get help with. And so, in other words, it's a short and sweet, and we feel that's very powerful. At the same time, there's other times when I'm alone and I want to just, I'm in the middle of something, I'm going somewhere, and it's like, wait a minute, I just need to stop and say a short 30 seconds, even connect with the universal energies, not necessarily naming specific energies, but putting it out for positive energies, because I do believe there's negative energies. And just kind of ask for help, really simple, and then put a pop of thank you kind of on the end. So it's like an edited version, but I feel it energetically every time I do it, if I'm willing to stop and take the time to do it. So I just want to get your comment on that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I appreciate you brought this up, because what it reminds me to comment on is that actually almost any one of these elements can stand alone or could be simplified. And they all have power. So to your point, taking time for gratitude, if you can't be in ceremony, absolutely matters. Taking time for invocation, if you can't be in ceremony, absolutely matters. All these things have power. And to your point, if we can't do it all, something is better than nothing. Absolutely, always. On the other hand, I would also say that if the intention is the invocation of a time in which we are interacting with the spirit world, then I would say the opposite, which is that any one of these can be short and sweet, powerful. And I think, to your point, we should sprinkle our day with those. I think that's exactly what you're offering. I think it's critical. And yet, when we need something a little more intense, something more involved, something where we're really asking for something, then I would say time, and this goes back to energy and meaning, time becomes one of the vehicles. And interestingly, when I was at that sweat lodge, and I'll be honest, there were only 4 of us, and this was this memorial. I mean, it was one of the longer, hotter lodges I've been in. And the point was that the ritual work that needed to be done was the ritual work that needed to be done. It didn't become shorter because there were only 4 of us and we were all like, let's get this over with and eat and go home. So my point being, absolutely sprinkle your day with these elements, just like what you're saying, Dick. And at the same time, when we're calling for something significant or looking for a deeper connection, like guidance, like more full and interactive guidance, I would say be very slow and spacious with time. And typically, and I hope this is okay, because I think you've brought up something and I'm now moving to something else. Typically, that's one of the markers of the difference between like what we might call daily rituals, like what you've offered, which I think are essential, or a time of ceremony. So whenever we have something like this at home, and my wife says to me as we're getting ready for the ceremony, if she says, can this be quick? Because we have to go do X, Y, and Z. I always say, let's just do it later. Because I don't want anyone in the ceremony that's waiting for it to be over or is looking at their watch or has somewhere to go. And that's tough. That's tough. So we'll still do it and we'll still honor that promise, but we won't ever do it. We'll never do it quickly. So it's a yes and answer if that's helpful. And thank you, because I think that highlights two important things for all of our lives. Is that helpful? Yeah, awesome. I really like that. Anyone else? Well, I know the time is over, but I have to say I'm whether this was helpful or not for you. What was that? I heard a noise.
It was deep and wide today, Jonathan.
Deep and wide. Well, yes, I was going to say whether it was helpful or not to you, I do believe deeply in these steps that I've shared. I'm glad we were able to capture it here. I think last week when we met, maybe some people were hoping for something more like this. And you know, maybe we should actually plan next week to do kind of an experiential version of this. I'm just thinking, there's a chance actually next week might be moved, but I promise if it's not next week, the next time we're live together, and I will make a note in the newsletter if it's not next week, let's do this. Let's actually create the ceremony together and walk through these exact steps.
That sounds great. And as a quick reminder, now that you're back in Canada, 2 weeks from today is American Thanksgiving Day. So take note of that.
That's true. I'll still be online, but you guys might be eating various interpretations of turkey.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be at an Indian reservation in Alabama, actually, but that's another story.
Very nice. All right. Well,
Jonathan,
yes.
Jonathan, I have a quick question. Do you see ceremony as always involving other people, or can you do ceremony alone?
I think you can absolutely do all these steps alone.
You're
Yeah.
never alone, Teresa.
Yes.
Yeah, I said with spirit.
Yes, exactly. So yes, I think absolutely alone. And frankly, I think a lot of people that do ceremony with and for other people really need to do some alone to be prepared and ready to do some with. Yeah. So absolutely, I'd say it's a must. And yet, to your point, there is definitely a difference. There's a different energy when we are with others, and both are powerful and both have their contribution. If it's a spirit world ceremony, though, I would say the ingredients remain the same. Yeah.
It was very helpful for me, Jonathan, because I'm doing my first expo reading cards, the first one I've done in about 8 years. And I always open the space and clear the space and prepare, but I don't always take my guests to the door. And so that's very useful and very helpful to be reminded of that.
Well, thank you. And I think, Joni, I saw your hand.
I just have one question. Being in nature is so much easier for me to do ceremony and to feel the energy of the spirits. It could be because my place is a mess. Do you feel a difference between inside and outside? And I see the sweat lodge as truly permeable, and you are in a sacred outdoor space, so to speak.
Yeah, so this is a really rich question. And without the world's longest answer, I will say, in general, it is my feeling that nature is usually the more potent setting for ceremony because of the energy that is innate, just as you said. However, I would add two caveats, which is ritual spaces, whether that's a cathedral, a synagogue, a mosque, a kiva, a sweat lodge, although you're right, sweat lodge is a different kind of space, over time do accumulate sacred potency. And that can be just as significant, maybe you could say, as nature. Different, but just as significant. The other caveat, and this is a whole other deep end of this topic, has to do with control of ritual space in order to facilitate the connection. And what we find quite common around the world, and particularly in the earth-based traditions, is that sometimes an interior space, believe it or not, is preferable because it allows us to control the environment more. And we may be able, and so typically, as the example, we may find a basement or a room where we can control all noise, control all interruptions, control the light, control the temperature. And so certain types of ceremonies, frankly, are done in absolute pitch darkness. And for me, I can say, having done private ceremonies, both like the same ceremony, both in nature and in a pitch black private interior space, they're definitely different. They're definitely different because the power of nature is so real. So sometimes it depends a little bit on what you're calling for. Yeah. And yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that. So yes, and these other two things.
The classic answer, it depends.
Depends, yes.
I was going to add one quick thing, Jonathan, about the ritual alone or with people. The quick thing I would add on that is in our meditation group, we always say when you have a group of 7, this has been measured actually, I believe, you're meditating with the power of 100 individuals. So for what that's worth.
There's definitely a lot of both science and tradition around the numbers of ritual. Lynn McTaggart did a book called The Power of 8. Joni, I think, led a group around that at Althea. And they talk about 8, something very similar, as being a significant number that's verified in science. In the Jewish tradition, I mean, 2,000 years ago, they said it was 10. I mean, they actually picked a number. Of course, Jesus said, where 2 or more are gathered. And his reference was to say that there is exponential growth in consciousness as people bring consciousness together. It's not arithmetic. It's not like, oh, now it's like there's 2 in the room. Now it's like there's 3 in the room. No, with every additional consciousness, there is each, and then there is the point of merging, and then there's the capacity of that totality to bring in something more. So, look, this is such a great topic. We could just go and go and go, but some of you are probably thinking, I got to get out of here. So let's wrap up. I want to thank you for being here. This is recorded and will be available again. And the next time we're live together, whenever that may be, probably next week, but if not, the next week, we will do a ritual together. So lots of love to everyone. Many blessings. And I hope to see you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.